Hi everyone, Danny here. On today's video, I invited Dr. Paul Comfort to talk about his recent research that investigated the response to moderate and high load strength and power training. Dr. Comfort is from University of Salford, and he's the program director for the Masters of Strength Conditioning program. Dr. Comfort is also the one of the founding member of UK Strength Conditioning Association. All right, let's get to the interview. Okay. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Today we are fortunate to invite Dr. Paul Comfort to speak with us on his recent study, which was to compare the effects of moderate and high intensity strength training. So thank you, Dr. Comfort.
No problem. Thanks for the invitation.
For the benefit of those who did not get the opportunity to read your article, would you be able to give us a brief talk through of what you did?
Yep, no problem. So we did 2 4-week blocks of strength and power-based training, including your normal exercises, squats, weightlifting, variations, etc. The first 4 weeks was a moderate load. So between about 60 and 80% of 1 repetition maximum. And the second block was a higher load between 80 and 90% of 1 repetition maximum. And we compared the effects of those 2 on force time characteristics during an isometric mid-thigh pull. So looking at rapid force development, so 50, 100, 150, 200 and 250 milliseconds, and also looking at isometric peak force. And because the movement velocities at the lower loads, the sort of 60 to 80% of 1 repetition maximum would be higher, we'd hypothesized that the rapid force development may be improved the most during those moderate loads, and then the maximum force production would be likely to improve the most during the higher load training, which sort of makes sense. However, we actually found completely the reverse, that the moderate load training resulted in the greatest improvements in strength, but minimal improvements, which were from no change up to about a 2.5% increase in rapid force development, so the force at 50 up to 250 milliseconds, but a much larger increase in isometric peak force. When we then compared the effects of the higher load training, so the higher load being the 80 to 90% of 1 repetition maximum, we observed the greatest improvements in rapid force development, which were between about 8 and 12% improvement in 4 weeks, but only a very small, significant, but a moderate improvement in peak force, which was only around about a 4% improvement. Now, what we don't know, obviously, from this is the exact effect of the moderate load training first on the high load training afterwards. We can't separate the 2 out without reversing the order that we perform those, but you wouldn't normally perform the very high load training before the moderate load training. So we tried to make sure this was as ecologically valid and represented what happens in the real world as much as possible. So I suppose in summary, we got the greatest improvements in maximal strength during the moderate load training. But the one thing to bear in mind with that is they were performing a higher volume of training, higher repetitions. So that may have created some residual fatigue because this was in season as well, and masked any changes in rapid force development. But the largest improvements in the rapid force development came from the higher intensity, higher load training. Again, at that point, with it being a higher intensity at 80 to 90% of 1 repetition maximum, the volumes performed during that time were lower. So it's likely that the individuals would have actually recovered from any of the residual fatigue that may have come from the higher intensity or higher volume phases previously.
So, were the participants already strength trained, or were they new to the strength training?
they already had experience in strength training, and there was a sort of a variability in their strength levels. So their 1 repetition maximum power clean wasn't great, but that's probably just saying something about athletes in the UK. That ranged from, so there was a range, that it ranged from as low as around about 0.7 kilograms per kilogram of body weight in a 1RM power clean, up to almost 1.4 kilograms per kilogram. So relatively weak to relatively strong within that group. We didn't have enough subjects to be able to split them into strong and weak individuals, unfortunately. That would have been a nice addition. But that potentially explains some of the variability we saw within those adaptations. Some individuals had substantial adaptations. They were generally the weaker individuals, and the stronger individuals generally showed much smaller percentage changes across either of those training blocks.
You actually had 34 subjects, 34 participants.
Yep.
Well, why did you think of having 2 groups, like one group starting with the heavy load and one group starting with the moderate load, instead of everyone doing the same?
Yeah, the reason we did that is purely the fitting it in with their normal training schedules, what the coaches, etc., would allow us to do, because that's not the way you would normally program athletes to go from the sort of high load to the more moderate load. It normally progresses up in loading. The only way we could really implement this was with it being in the format that we did it. It would be great to have done it, almost done a crossover trial and flip things around. But unfortunately, we didn't have the ability to do that, or couldn't convince the coaching staff for the athletes to allow us to do it that way around, which is always the difficulty with doing applied research in this way. And then when we tried looking at splitting them into sort of stronger and weaker groups, it would have left, even though we had quite a few subjects overall, to split them down to strong and weak, we weren't getting a particularly good match that in terms of there were a much lower number of stronger athletes and a much higher percentage of weaker athletes. But it's something we'd certainly like to look at it in more detail in the future to see how strength does affect this. We've got a good idea from the other research that's out there, and the individual data from this study does indicate that you obviously, as you would expect, you get much greater adaptations in weaker individuals who will respond to almost any training stimulus, and stronger individuals generally don't adapt as rapidly.
So it's pretty interesting that the moderate load actually increased most the higher peak force than the high load. What I was thinking is, could it have been the reason of a diminishing return after a block of training?
Yeah, possibly, because they'd had such big improvements during that moderate load training. The rate of adaptations would likely slow down, although for the weaker individuals, they certainly won't have hit that strength level to really hit diminishing returns. But if you've had large adaptations over a 4-week period, you wouldn't normally expect that to continue for as long. That may have actually been what led to the improvements in the rapid force development afterwards, is the fact that the weaker individuals had substantially greater force production capability, and then we then just trained them within the second 4-week block to be able to use that force more efficiently, which is actually what you do with a normal sort of block periodized training approach anyway. You set the foundations in one block to really reap the rewards in the next block. But yeah, it would be really nice to have done a crossover trial and looked if we'd swapped them around the other way, what would have happened. But overall, the results were pretty promising, so we were quite happy with them.
So what I was thinking is, how the early force development actually improved more after the improved more during the heavy load. Would it be like a delay adaptation kind of thing? Like you always need to have a higher strength development, so maximum strength development, before you are able to further develop your ability to develop force quickly.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said a moment ago, it could just be that during that period of moderate training, because the volumes are higher as well, you've got some residual fatigue there, which dissipates during the subsequent phase when the volume's lower. And actually, I think we've put in the discussion, one of the studies by Dr. Lackland James showed that there is a delayed training effect, especially in weaker individuals, where the sort of adaptations that you get during a block of training don't really manifest themselves until a few weeks afterwards. So that is likely part of the reason that we got those bigger increases in the rapid force development during the second period. It might not actually be the second phase of training which allowed that, or it's a synergistic effect of the higher volume during that first block and the lower volume during the second block which allowed that to manifest itself.
This is kind of interesting. Like most of the time during a normal a typical training plan, we plan the maximum strength phase followed by the power phase, whereby we lift pretty light loads but rapidly.
Yep.
Yeah. So how does this the result of this study would the result of this study actually change this arrangement?
Not necessarily. What would have been really nice would to be able to actually add in a third 4-week block, focusing far more on ballistic, plyometric, higher velocity movements to see if we actually got greater adaptations then. However, with this group of lifters, their emphasis really needed to be strength because they weren't particularly strong to start with. So there was a combination within both of these blocks with some of the weightlifting exercises and the normal strength-based exercises. So there was a combination of both strength and power type movements. It would be nice to have seen if we had that much higher velocity, more ballistic type training in a third block, whether that would have given us even greater adaptations. Again, part of the issue was that the coaching staff involved within this really wanted to make sure we got the athletes stronger because they generally weren't anywhere near as strong as they needed to be. So wanted more of a strength emphasis. So we didn't go into a proper sort of power block of training afterwards.
I see. That's good. All right. So what other studies can we look forward to from you?
There's quite a few things that we've collected data on already. Due to lockdown, obviously some of it's stopped. But we've got some work coming up looking at a range of different methods of assessing performance. So one of my colleagues, Dr. John McMahon, is looking at a range of different methods for assessing drop jump performance and assessing different aspects of neuromuscular function with a drop jump, with part of the problem being that with a drop jump, if you stand on a 30 centimeter box, you don't drop from 30 centimeters, and that varies each time. And it's very, very rare. I think there's only a couple of studies out there where the authors are actually stipulated what height they drop from, but that can be as much as a 30% variation. So for using something like a drop jump for longitudinal monitoring may be problematic if you've got a 30% variation in drop height because the demand of the task is much higher or much lower potentially. And then also using it as a training tool, it could be an easy task one day and a very hard task the next day. If you step down from the box one day and you jump off the box the following day, it's a completely different task. So there's a few studies in the pipeline there that Dr. John McMahon's leading, and we've also got some work looking at microdosing of training, which is pretty popular across social media at the moment, but there's only a handful of studies which have actually really looked at subdividing resistance training over a more frequent number of sessions within a week compared to your traditional sort of 2 training sessions, and the potential effect that might have on performance, especially in team sports where there's fixture congestion, you've got limited time to train and you need to optimize or maximize recovery between competition and training. So they're the sort of areas that we're going to be looking at the moment, and I think will be the next series of publications that you'll see from us.
You have one more. You're co-authoring a paper with me.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, isometric, comparing isometric and plyometric training.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot for your time today.
No problem.
Yeah. Hope you will have a good day ahead.
Brilliant, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you for watching today's video. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. See you next time.